Within the last couple of years, we've seen several well-made and amazingly received movie or TV show adaptations of video games. Meanwhile, video game adaptations of movies are still stuck at the bottom of the pit. But why is that? Well, back then, video game adaptations of movies and TV shows were supposedly made in order to promote the source materials for the time it releases, for DVD or the movie and TV shows if they release pretty close to each other. They're, well, usually achieved with mixed receptions, for a couple of reasons. Reasons we will see throughout this video. Have you ever seen The Italian Job from 1969? A British comedy caper movie featuring Michael Caine as Charlie Crooker and the heist group with their attempt to steal a shipment of gold from the streets of Turin. Being mainly a comedy caper means that the movie was a lot more light-hearted and witty with its writing, with a lot of that old British humor embedded into the culture. At the time, this movie was impressive for its stunt work, with the iconic climax with a fleet of Mini Coopers going wild off the streets of Turin in their attempt to escape with the gold shipment in hand. Over 3 decades later, a video game adaptation based on the movie by Pixelogic and Rockstar Games for both PS1 and PC would be made, with focus mainly directed towards the high adrenaline driving sequences. As such, this game would turn out as a game with similar takes as Driver would, being mostly about driving cars throughout many challenges. In that respect, this game does seem to follow the big outline of what happens in the movie, just way more compact and missing a lot of the interesting writing and dialogues between characters whenever they're off their cars. Starting off with Charlie, our main protagonist released from prison, to eventually setting up the crew, gear, plans for the heist itself, and eventually the big escape. It should be noted that since this game was developed 32 years after the movie, most of the original cast are not going to reprise their role even as voice actors, so instead they got a bunch of voice actors to impersonate the speech of the characters, which I would probably rate at about 6 out of 10-ish. The missions all take place between 3 map areas of London, Turin, and the Alps. Most of the missions taking place in London are about recruiting and prepping the basic needs for the heist, with the bloody Rozzers as the main adversary to deal with, while Turin is mostly filled by the immediate sabotage and prep work alongside the day of the heist, with the immediate presence of the Italian mafia. While the game takes some liberties to adapt with the change in media, the lack of power of the PS1 does end up being the biggest drawback. They couldn't really do any FMVs with a focus on the characters because of the models back then, and if they ever tried to really fill in the narrative beats with cutscenes, it might end up hurting the pacing. Physics problems also kicks in without the proper way to really emulate some scenes from the movie, so instead some missions here are altered events or completely made up in order to justify itself as a video game. As a result, most of the missions can be a completely mixed bag with its execution and balancing. Most of the point A to point B missions can be simple if not a bit tricky due to modifiers like having to drive in a bomb-rigged bus, having to know shortcuts through alleyways and ramps, making a lot of the missions be dependent on map knowledge. You can absolutely train this by going through the other game modes, consisting of the Destructor mode of destroying cones, checkpoint for time trial races around both maps, or the free roam mode for both London and Turin, as the game has effectively 2 open world areas with its use being limited by main mission set pieces, and you can explore these options at any time you want through the game. Some are going to be locked behind some story progression, so alternating between modes can really come in handy, especially for the other mission types like the tailing missions can be a complete pain. Any mistakes can easily destroy your chances of keeping up, since the AI is obviously on rails. You don't have to deal with the weird physics quirk of the game. This game's handling is a bit weird, with a very occasional heavy understeer. It's mainly whenever the car interacts with bumps, things can get uncontrollable. You have to master this handling for the somewhat tight time limit or to escape the pursuing cops or mafia. If you ever let them read your entire license plate or bring them to point B without losing them, some of the missions also offer a unique alternate ending for failing them. Besides all of this issue, the interception mission with 20 security cameras placed all over the map of Turin. They don't really direct you to where they're located, only an arrow that will pinpoint the exact location if you're close enough. This is unironically the hardest mission in the game, as it requires complete memorization of Turin's overworld, without having an actual map to help with navigation while under a strict time limit. Every mission will set us up with a different car, each with different power, drivetrain, and surprisingly named brands. There's the Aston Martin DB4, Mini Cooper S, Fiat Dino, Ford Anglia, Jaguar E-Type, Shelby Cobra, and a couple more to be revealed. Once the story is done, however, we're hit with a similar ending to the movie, with its ambiguous ending at the edge of our seats. Beating the story mode unlocks several things. First being the cars that were used in the game, including one exclusively seen Lamborghini Miura from the intro cutscene. The other is a challenge mode, which effectively is some extra content similar to the missions in story mode, just without any narrative context or importance. While most of the game definitely feels like a mixed bag, some unwieldy physics, inconsistent difficulty, and questionable design choices, I can't help but feel the developers really tried to make this game work as a mix of gameplay and cinematic experience. Some of the ways they played around with the camera mid-gameplay is certainly interesting, but holy crap, is this game unapologetically British, just like the movie it's based on. But we are not done yet with The Italian Job, because that movie was one of many to receive the dreaded American remake. In 2003, they committed such a crime to create Italian Job featuring Mark Wahlberg. Because this is an American remake, it had effectively lost all of the charm from the aggressive Britishness, focusing more towards being an action movie with its plot centered around revenge, more than what was originally a comedy. This game is instead developed by Climax Brighton and published by Eidos Interactive, released in the same year as the movie, with a time difference of a month between the two, entirely based on the remake with a story mode following the events of the movie. The game, however, doesn't have any license to the cast of the movie, so any narration is purely done by impressionist voice actors.
He didn't mind or seem to notice how nervous she was. Seeing her father's killer was a lot for her to deal with.
The missions here are fairly basic, being the same point A to point B, tailing missions, and sometimes things like escape missions based on the events of the movie. Unfortunately, due to several factors in play, this game just feels very dull and bland to experience. First off, the narration feels really dry. They kind of tell you what's going on for the story, so functionally it works fine. Second, this game's story takes place in the same areas as the movie, which effectively replaces London and Turin with Los Angeles, and unfortunately, Los Angeles is just way less interesting to drive through than London. The roads are significantly wider, there's way less traffic despite the game using PS2 capabilities, and unfortunately there isn't really anything to spice up the driving. The handling is generally alright. Every car seems grippy enough and responds well, so I can't really complain there. It's mainly everything else that has issues. The map is not being as well designed, with the only navigation being a radar with dots on them, causing a lot of moments where you just circle an area looking for the correct entrance. Cops just instantly bust you if you ever stop anywhere near them and can't be shaken off. At the end of any mission or even side activities, we get graded with scores, mostly based on our performance and time remaining, of which is extremely lenient. Way too lenient, in fact. This lack of proper difficulty translates to pretty much every single part of the game, including the non-story mode content as well, with circuit mode having some really piss-easy opponents to deal with, stunt tracks being only ever difficult if you somehow screw it up royally, and time trial being, well, a time trial. Also, free roam is also available, although there isn't really much of a reason to try it out this time. Each of these side activities features a bunch of cars that you'd normally drive from the story mode, being unlocked based on grades from the mission events, so there are some reasons to get good at least. It seems every car besides the Mini Coopers are non-licensed, which this game actually, to its credit, puts you into the seat of the iconic Mini Coopers way more than the original version did. And they even have the classic Mini Coopers used in the 1969 movies as an option for some of the side activities. Also, a bunch of pre-production stuff like pictures from the set, stills from the film, concept art for both movie and game, and development sneak peek of the game. It's just that this game genuinely feels way too sanitized and has too much repetition. Hell, even the final mission is completely underwhelming with a very long chase sequence only for it to end in a scripted crash. It's partially not the fault of the game alone, since it is a side effect of the movie being taken in by Hollywood, causing the movie to also be quite sanitized, so to speak. That's not to say that the 2003 movie is completely bad. It has some good qualities to it, just no unique flair to make it stand out among the sea of action movies at the time, and as a result, the game adaptation also suffers for trying to be accurate to its source material. Maybe they could have embellished some stuff and expanded on what the movie tried to do, but judging by the presentations, it's pretty clear just how cheap this game is, that it's possibly made quickly just to tie in into the movie's success. Speed Racer the video game, developed by Side Interactive and published by Warner Bros. In the year of 2008. The mention of Warner Brothers should easily tell you this game is based on the American adaptation of Speed Racer, specifically the movie made by the Wachowskis, the same people behind the Matrix movies. Based on the intro narration, this game seems to take place after the events of the movie, with most of the characters already having their established character development, alliances, and rivalries set up. So I would recommend watching the movie first before going into this, if you're curious about the lore setups. It's not mandatory though, since the game is particularly light in regards to storytelling or lore. Most of the individual racers that previously were just side or even background characters have been given a bit more exposure by making them into playable characters, of which there are 20 characters in total for the Wii version. The PS2 version instead gets 25 characters, each with their own vehicles and stats associated. Aside from characters, the version also differs with 5 tracks by default and 1 additional track for the PS2 version. So in terms of content, the PS2 version is the superior one. Regardless of the version though, the visuals are super saturated and colorful, in an attempt to mimic the colorful tone of the movie. Personally, they should have toned it down as it gets quite unbearable on the eyes after a while. For the gameplay, this is where the game gets really spicy. Main progression follows the championship system, the 3 class categories in every championship season. On the surface, it looks like your average high-speed anti-gravity racer. You have the boosts, drifts, and verticality. Simply go fast, use every mechanic to avoid crashing and slowing down to reach the finish line and get that sweet victory. Dig a little deeper and you'll find some insane level of depth that could really change how each player would approach the game. So first, let's get back to the initial question. Do you know Kung Fu?
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
Well, we better start learning because this is just as important as going fast. The so-called Carfu mechanic can be engaged in several ways. The basic sideways shunts are the easiest to land. Spinning, which can hit multiple opponents in every direction but slows us down significantly and possibly gets us stuck in awkward angles, or by pulling off some style, either with a normal jump using R3, or through front flips, back flips, and barrel rolls by moving the right analog stick. If you manage to hit any opponent, at the very least you'll get some Carfu score. Pull off a combo or destroy the opponent, that score goes up significantly. You can basically treat this as if it's a fighting game over a racing game, and unironically win the championship campaign mode that way, as every 1000 score adds 1 point, letting any racer finish first from being aggressive over fast. But if you want fast, then there's the other alternative mechanics. Every character at first can stack up to 4 boosts, with each stack increasing speed and making the visuals progressively trippy. Boost usually builds them naturally, but there are ways to affect how fast it fills up, pulling off successful Carfu moves being the most obvious, but it's not that straightforward either. See, with great power comes great responsibility. If you just pull off that fancy Carfu recklessly, it won't just simply slow you down, you may end up hitting your alliance member. If that happens, your boost goes down as a penalty, and if that causes them to be destroyed, well, you just lost a friend. This alliance system is weird, since it's a bit basic and advanced at the same time. The most important bit to know is each character has a default ally and rival characters. In each race you can forge or break alliances to make things easier or more dynamic, since every ally effectively will avoid pulling Carfu mechanics on you to focus on your rival instead. Having everyone be your ally makes a race significantly easier, since no one is going to challenge your authority, but it also makes it way too boring. Having only one ally on the other hand makes the entire field run on the free-for-all rules. Everyone is out for each other, and it's honestly the most interesting way to experience the races. Sometimes after each race, another character may also turn into a rival. It might just be random occurrences, but it does feel like rivals get buffed performances in races, with boosted rubber band capabilities to catch up. I suppose the only thing left to discuss is the tracks and its multiple layouts. There's 5 to 6 tracks which dictate the environment and visuals. Each of these tracks will also have different layouts or configuration, 3 clockwise and 3 counterclockwise layouts of different lengths. In regards to the verticality, there are certainly a lot of thoughts being put into the design to really fit with the Carfu mechanic, with some ramps being made to utilize mechanics to have the best entry or exits, while punishing those with reckless usage of the Carfu mechanic. Luckily, the game is quite merciful as death is not an instant DNF. All of these tracks and their layouts are unlockable alongside the characters via championship mode. The lack of variety beyond its regular races is certainly the game's biggest weakness. Every single championship event, single races, or time trial will mostly play in a similar way. There's no alternative modes that really stress test the game's other mechanics, so at most players are expected to really get good with Carfu from continuous exposure to the mechanic. But for what it is, it's yet another anti-gravity racer with a lot of unique mechanics. A comeback of the Carfu system certainly would be interesting to see in some recent titles. So Knight Rider, one of the most influential TV shows to come out of the 80s. I mean, who wouldn't be interested in what is essentially a modern take on a western cowboy story with an ultra-futuristic talking car that can do a ton of exceptional feats? That kind of attraction also led to a ton of attempts to adapt the series into video games. Too bad a lot of them kinda suck, especially the one we're covering this time. Knight Rider from 2002 by Davilix, as they somehow develop and publish the game. It's a bit unclear where or when the story is supposed to take place within the Knight Rider canon. A lot of the story beats does also feel a bit like fan fiction in certain regards to the characters. As usual though, we play the role of the hero and his iconic car buddy, Kit. The overall gameplay only features the mission mode string into a single campaign progression. In total there's 14, 15 if you want to be extra generous, and count the tutorial as its own mission. To be fair though, it's pretty important as Kit has some really weird features we can or will have to take advantage of. Being a modified Pontiac Trans Am, he definitely drives like a muscle car, with some tendency to wheel spin when turning, or more annoyingly after every landing, which comes as part of Kit's collection of abilities. The jumping, or rather turbo boost as the game would call it, functions as a way for Kit to jump past obstacles or in the worst cases, platforming challenges. The other acrobatics to pull off is the ski mode, letting Kit drive sideways on two wheels and effectively drive past narrow platforms or gates. Although I don't know why they had to use both trigger buttons to occupy left and right leaning. They could have made another ability to fill up the slots. The other thing Kit can do is this.
Scan initiated.
See, this could be an interesting mechanic to really make use of, but there's two big problems. To use it, Kit has to be stationary, so there's not going to be any intense chases with scanning used as a mechanic. And the other problem is the very inconsistent minimum range. Sometimes they let you scan at around 50 meters away. Other times you have to be exactly next to the thing for the scan to work. All three gimmicks mentioned above basically covers all the gameplay mechanics this game has to offer, and unfortunately, it does not get any better from here. The initial mission is mainly a chase against an uncatchable opponent, while having to avoid the mines and... Also, I guess while we're discussing the story, why are the character models so janky looking? It's kinda distracting when they pop up during the conversations, but this mission is only one of many types in the game. The next one is a bit more of a traditional point-to-point mission with a time limit. While I will admit the timing can be pretty strict, this mission also showcases the game's biggest problem with how it designed the challenge. Most of the time, you just have to know how to do car platforming, which doesn't really come off as natural thanks to the very janky jump animations. You're basically smashing Kit into a wall most of the time when platforming past multiple floors of containers here. The next few missions we actually get to do some damage against the enemy cars and do some stealth segments. Unfortunately, this does add more highlight to the game's weird, janky, and underdeveloped mechanics. Kit doesn't have any offensive weapons installed for some reason, so the only thing we can do is just ramming. And the hitbox is also quite inconsistent. The stealth mission, on the other hand, is only stealth in the most minimal way ever. There's no such thing to stealth against. It's mainly just an excuse to have Kit jump between roofs and pretend he's stealthy somehow. From this point on, the missions are pretty much formulaic and feel too copy-pasted. Drive to a location and scan, or drive from point A to point B in a specific time limit. Drive in the same 2-3 maps that get reused over and over and over again. The only time they did something different is with two specific missions. A race duel against Kit's evil older brother, Car, and an arena combat against Michael's evil twin, Garth Knight, in his souped-up Goliath rig, which if you remember about the collision effect, is actually pretty lame. game. Since you can't really do anything to enhance Kit's abilities or performance, most variation comes from the map design. From the snippets mentioned before, this is the game's most divisive aspect. Usually the maps used for point-to-point missions or chase events are specifically designed to the missions, but there is one map. That big circular map with the suburbs and factories seems to get used repeatedly, probably a bit too often as well. But even with some variety, most of the map still takes place in the sandy canyon dunes with some extremely minimal visual diversity. At some points the map just went from being pretty mid to outright confusing as to where you're supposed to go or platform through. And at this rate, I'd rather move on than continue with this. The most basic description I can say about this game is that it really does not live up to the name of Knight Rider. Somehow, despite being kitted with the most advanced car known to man, they don't really take much advantage of that. Kit only does very simple platforming jumps, a very rarely used two-wheel driving mode, and that's it. Oh, and they also did introduce this mechanic called the Super Pursuit mode, letting Kit transform and unleash his ultimate capability. If only it was actually useful. The thing can't really be used effectively outside of straight roads, and immediately deactivates from the smallest of things. Chalk that one up as another big disappointment. It would be hard to make this video without mentioning Hot Wheels, just from the amount of brand recognition that has been built since a long time ago, giving them some time to build up on that portfolio of games and TV shows, or in this case, a game about one of their own movies. Hot Wheels World Race was an animated movie featuring a bunch of characters that would later be known better in the sequel Acceleracers. So if you're one of those people that has seen the sequel series but not this, you'll actually recognize some of the characters immediately. As for the game, it is based on the same movie of the same name, even using the movie clips as its introduction cinematic. Developed by Climax Brighton and published by THQ in the year 2003. The way things start is a bit confusing though. At the very top we see challenges, so the first thought is probably about it being the main progression path, but it's actually not. Challenge is effectively a tutorial mode, the only place besides the loading screen that will introduce mechanics for the players. This of course includes the basic driving, how to drift past corners, collecting boosts from rings, stunts, activating shortcuts, and everything else that will be relevant. And once we're done with the challenges though, it's straight back to the main menu, which begs the question, where the hell is the actual progression? Well, it's actually just the league mode in single player. The usual championship or tournament modes. To any fans that are aware of the story, this game will come out as a massive disappointment, but here's the thing. This game actually came out before the movie did. Not even in like a couple of days away like Cars. No, this game came out 2 months before the movie was even released. It may explain the decision to not give the game any massive relevant story bits so they don't just get spoiled for the movie, and this game is basically just a promotional piece for it. Except for the fact that there was a TV show titled Hot Wheels Highway 35 back in July or August of 2003, 2 months before the game came out. Although it doesn't really change the fact that it's really disappointing to not even get any crumbs of lore here. Not even the characters are given anything to make them stand out besides the cars they're assigned with. No character profiles and not even any voice lines, which really makes the whole character irrelevant to the vehicle selection screen. The only thing to pay attention to is whether or not you like how the cars look and or their stats. They're split into 5 different teams, each having their own liveries and color scheme. Each team will have 7 members, totaling the whole car roster to 35 cars overall. But at first, we're only given the leaders as playable, with ways to unlock them for winning individual races. Gallery pictures are only unlocked if you manage to set a new time record per lap, and that is pretty much it. There's no upgrades, alternative customization, or anything else. Most of the gallery contents are just more images of the characters and their cars. There's not that many alternatives to that either, since they're just one each. The league experience itself is a very slow burn, all thanks to the way things are distributed. Despite there being only 3 of them, they effectively make you replay the same tracks from previous leagues anyways, exponentially increasing the amount of time spent on the second and third leagues significantly. Maybe this can be a good idea to help with ramping up difficulty on repeat tracks, but I feel like having way more leagues with less repeating tracks on each subsequent league would be better overall. The way tracks are currently spread out, it just makes the later leagues feel tedious, but at least the tracks are pretty unique and designed in such a way where every mechanic comes into play. Although it can be quite inconsistent thanks to some aspects, like the limited ways to refill the Nitrox. It's only filled up by 2 ways, obtaining rings and pulling off stunts. The problem? Pulling stunts is entirely dependent on the track design having stunt wraps included, of which there are actually several tracks with only 1 or none at all available. And the Nitrox ring does not respawn every lap. The moment you pick them up, they're gone. The experience and pacing can really fluctuate in the early stages, Once we get to the mid-game tracks, however, the experience actually gets a lot better, with so many stunt ramps to take advantage of the game's stunt system, increasing the overall speed with a triple stunt booster. Not only that, some shortcuts only obtainable from boosting on the stunt ramps increases, making strategic usage and gain of
Nitrox
more important later on, while they also hide the shortcut triggers through this method. On top of the faster opponents too, skill will be tested in the final league. So I guess the overall gameplay here can be pretty great when it actually gets there. The problem still stems from the slow early pacing. The lack of any direct story connection also really doomed the game into being a straightforward racer with not much of a gameplay variety to really shake things up. It would be a lie to say it's not disappointing. There were moments in the movie that really show some level of ingenuity with puzzles and riddles, but with cars that could have been implemented into a linear driving mission game instead. As of currently, this is a pretty good game on its own rights, but as an adaptation, it really feels like it's just using Highway 35 or World Race as a skin layer. The lack of small details such as any characterization, lore, or even voice lines may be minimal, but together they make the game feel less connected to the source. Besides some of these examples, originally I was going to cover some other adaptations, but unfortunately most of them are your average kart racers, which to be fair does have some standout gameplay mechanics to be unique from each other, but they don't really stand out otherwise. They were a part of this sudden boom of mascot games that started way back in the late 90s, spawning a ton of cheaply made mascot platformers and kart racers, since they rarely have to put in the effort to actually tie into the IP beyond having relevant characters and visuals. The conclusion I can get out of this is that this genre of video games is really all over the place. It kinda explains why they're not as commonly seen anymore, especially now that Hollywood is the one running out of ideas. But even back then, you'd think having a fully built blueprint from the source materials would make things easier, but it seems other factors tend to be more of a problem, like the time constraint, since a movie-based game is supposed to be released relatively close to each other, or the lack of thought and care from whoever is responsible for the project, thinking the brand recognition alone can get them easy money from clueless parents. I've even covered the Fast and Furious games adaptation only to find a very disappointing result, despite the advantages it would have over other franchises.